Sheva.
Boker Tov.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome, everyone. I know a couple of you were missing last week. Welcome back. It's good to see everyone. We're really looking forward to our learning today. I'm going to turn things over to Rabbi Berkowitz. He's going to start things off a little bit differently. Rabbi?
Thanks, Carolyn. Tzaharaim Tovim from Israel. Good afternoon. Boker Tov to all of you in North America. Great to be back again with you. I want to say that I'm very much looking forward to our session today, as I do to all of our sessions, but in particular with this session. Why? Because it is the 37th anniversary of my bar mitzvah, this week's Parsha, Parshat Naso. And I also have to mention that that's far more than 37-year anniversary for my father as well. We have the same Parsha. So I'm very, very excited to be teaching Parshat Naso, and as has become my tradition in Israel, I'm going to be reading Haftarah the coming Shabbat at our synagogue in Jerusalem. So really looking forward to that. I felt it would be rabbinic negligence if I didn't share with you some comments on the situation in Israel. So I want to begin with that. And I know well that this is going to spark plenty of thinking and comments on your side of the ocean. So after I say my piece, we want to open the conversation up for about 10 minutes time. And as always, Carolyn is going to be our referee par excellence. And I ask you to listen to Carolyn, and we will all be good, and I'm looking forward to a conversation with you. So, so let me share some thoughts. The foreign minister of Germany made a trip to Israel this morning, today, expressing his unequivocal support for the Jewish people and stating clearly that we have the right to defend ourselves. What have we come to that the words and sentiments uttered by the German foreign minister are so difficult to say for the younger generation of American Jews? I am exhausted from this past week, from both reading the many emails and messages of support from so many of you in the States, but also exhausted from defending Israel. So I want to share with you some thoughts and some difficult questions to push all of you out of your comfort zone. For those on the left, we are not occupiers of land, we as in Israeli Jews. We are not colonialists in Israel. We have 4,000 years of history tied to this place that we call Israel. And I resent any of you calling me an occupier. In 2005, then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, Zichrono Livracha, gave Gaza back to the Palestinians, a golden opportunity for them to create a Palestinian state rooted in democratic values. And instead, they destroyed Israeli infrastructure and used their territory for the past 16 years as a launching base for terrorist missiles. Only since the latest chapter began about 10 days ago, we have been the target of over 3,000 missiles raining down from the sky. Where is your empathy for Jewish citizens of Israel? And where were you with your righteous indignation when Assad used chemical weapons against his own citizens? When he slaughtered his own people, why didn't you raise your voices with the same sense of urgency? Or why don't you cry to the high heavens as China commits genocide against the Uyghur people? Where are the UN resolutions against China? Where is the chorus of condemnation against China, Burma, Iran, Russia? Need I go on? The double standard is glaring. As long as Jews are persecuted, it is acceptable. Look at Los Angeles. Look at New York, attacks on Jews. The moment we become sovereign in our own land and have power, we are outcasts. Do you naively believe that more territorial compromise will bring peace? This is not about 1967. This is about 1948. Ein li eretz acheret gam im admati boeret, right? From the words of a very, very famous musician in Israel, I have no other land, even if this land is burning. And for those on the right politically, Israel has gone through 4 elections over the past couple of years. And in not a single one of these elections have we discussed the Palestinian issue or a 2-state solution. The issue was simply ignored because we can live with the status quo. Do you really believe we can have a Jewish and democratic state and continue to restrict the lives of 2.16 million Arabs who are living in the West Bank? The issue is simply ignored because we can live with the status quo. The Palestinians have a rightful claim to self-determination and a state of their own. Why hasn't there been any movement in this direction? We are occupying a people, not a land, but a people. Enough already, I say. Do we need to parade in the streets of East Jerusalem Arab neighborhoods, waving Israeli flags and rubbing salt in the wounds of Palestinian Arabs? Why do we now have kahanas in the Knesset that seek to expel Arab citizens and cause incitement? Why are you silent when a prime minister of Israel warns Israeli voters that Arabs are flooding the polls on election day? How could that be right? You say the media is responsible for all the evil in the world. I say, thank God for responsible journalists, and there are plenty of them out there. Why do you think there is only one way of being pro-Israel? Read AIPAC, blindly supporting the Israeli government no matter what it does, staying silent even as we conservative and Reform Jews are denied basic freedom of religion in this country. Why is rampant religious fundamentalism toxically combined with nationalism okay for Jewish Israelis? So I want to share with you, last night I received an email from a very, very dear colleague of mine, and he wrote the following. I, sitting here, feel really angry with Netanyahu and those who made the decision to cut the speakers at Al-Aqsa. Why? Why then on Ramadan? It makes me so suspicious in terms of the election and a desire to return to violence to protect his power. Typically, I'm not the suspicious type. And I wonder about the wonderful work and coexistence that so many have been engaged in and why we didn't have a government vocally advocating for this work. Where was the government so that it could have been creating a vision for coexistence without giving up anything? Where are the voices of civility yelling against the kahanas and racists? How did this happen? And I am sickened by the real estate deals that have pushed hope for peace further and further away. I can write this to you. I can't say this publicly because people will say I am not a supporter of Israel. How wrong are they? It is because I support Israel that I know we need to double down on the attempts to rid ourselves of racists and haters and reinforce the peacemakers, as hard as that is. As I read in the Musaf on Shavuot, I reflected on the notion, Umipnei chata'enu galinu meratzenu, because of our sins we were exiled from the land. And I realized how in this conflict, no one can look at themselves. Too much resentment, too many fingers pointed outward. I believe the powerful have the capacity to change their reality. It must be done carefully. Justice must be pursued, and no one should for a moment compromise their security. Close quotes from this colleague. So this rabbi, I conclude by saying, it is very lonely, both in the state of Israel and the Jewish world, if you are a supporter of Israel who has a nuanced understanding of the world. If you have a neshama, a soul that understands the right of Israel to defend itself from a terrorist onslaught, and also appreciate the need for Palestinian self-determination. If you are committed to the idea of Jewish peoplehood and expressing solidarity and empathy with Israel, and also recognize that there is suffering on the other side. I pray for better days ahead for the state of Israel and for Jews the world over. Okay, now I'm ready for your answer.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I just,
Yeah, it's going to take a minute to digest all that. And Matt, thank you for your very heartfelt and nuanced comments. It's a difficult situation. Diane, you unmuted. I'll let you share first. Let's try and keep your comments.
no, my Diane Troutman goes, I am not muted. Which Diane are you asking for? I'm not
I'm
muted.
asking you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
okay, 'cause I'm unmuted and I never went on. No, my heart is just racing. I have never heard such clarity, such caring. I cannot wait until I give this recording, not only to my kids who we're so proud of when they do this chat back and forth with their hearts heavy and yet their hearts open for the situation and understanding everything that Matt said, that I so truly believe in a two-state solution. But more importantly, I'd love to get this recording just to hear Matt, to give to people who are like my congressman, who when he would hear what Matt said, who's such a defender of Israel. It is amazing. But also what is said is that when my grandson talks about his defending of the state of Israel, people on Twitter are saying disgusting things to him because he defends the state of Israel. And here we are in the United States, and how the Republicans refused to go for a commission for terrible things that were done on January 6th, to have two incredible countries fighting for what is right. It is very, very sad. And Matt, thank you so much. It's even hard to speak. I have tears in my eyes. You're an amazing
Thanks, Diane.
man.
And we'll, you know what, Matt, maybe you can share with us the written.
Yeah, I'm
copy.
happy to share your written copy. I deliberately sat down and wrote the words because there was a lot that I wanted to say, and I wanted to be sure that I said it correctly and properly. And so I'm happy to share that.
Thank you. Stanley, if you'll unmute.
Okay, so Matthew, as you know, we have some disagreements. And, you know, I heard a very subtle statement that you made about not occupying a people, but people need land.
I need to correct you.
Okay.
Not occupying land. I said clearly we are occupying a people.
Occupying a people, yes. But you're in favor of not occupying a people. But
Yes.
the people have to have land. And my question is, where is the land? Okay? If you have between 600,000, 700,000 settlers living in the West Bank, you know, I have my daughter-in-law has a sister living in the West Bank. They refer to that as you know, Judea and Samaria. Okay, it's a part of Israel. So I don't see any place for a second state. A second state. I just don't. And I don't see how, if there is a second state, another state, a Palestinian state, now it's not going to turn into Gaza. Okay, unless it's under Israeli control. You know. So I was very impressed with Tom Friedman's column the other day. He talked about a near miss with Yair Lapid almost able to form the coalition that he needs, using the Arab parties in the Knesset as part of the coalition. To me, that would be a way out of this. There's a future there. You know, and if it's one state, then it's one state. I don't know how they're going to do it, but I think that's, that's the only hope. And of course, that hope was dashed with what happened. So,
Okay, so Stanley, I want to sharpen what I
Stanley.
said. Okay. First of all, I want to direct you all to Yossi Klein Halevi's latest piece in the New York Times. I encourage you all to read that. Yossi speaks with great thought and great clarity, and Yossi is a teacher and mentor of mine. And I want to say to you, Stanley, I believe like Yossi. Okay, I live, or perhaps I should say, I sleep with two nightmares. Okay, those two nightmares are, one is that there will be a Palestinian state, and the other nightmare is that there won't be a Palestinian state. Okay, let me begin with the latter. That there won't be a Palestinian state would be devastating for the future of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. Okay, I am a very, very strong believer that there needs to be two states in order to preserve, right, our democracy in Israel and to preserve the Jewish nature of this country, period. Okay, there is no question in my mind. Okay, but the other nightmare that Yossi points out is that there is a Palestinian state like what you described, Stanley, that it ends up turning into Gaza. Okay, we cannot be the sovereigns over Palestinian citizens. They need to build their own national framework and network, and they have to take responsibility for their future. When I say that we do not occupy land, what I'm saying very, very clearly is that we have historical rights in Judea and Samaria. No question about it in my mind. Okay, when we talk about the land of Israel and we look at Torah, we just read the first few chapters of Genesis, it's talking about Bethel, it's talking about Hebron. That's the biblical heartland of Israel, period. Okay, one cannot say that the Jewish people does not have a history there. That's what I mean to say, okay? And Yossi Klein Halevi believes the same thing. And the issue is that we, Yossi and me and plenty of us, recognize that we have deep historical roots there, and in the same breath we will say that for the sake of peace and for the sake of a future for both of our peoples, we need to make compromise and we need to establish a Palestinian state in those places, in the West Bank, period. It needs to happen. Okay, if we continue with the status quo as it is, it's going to destroy us and them. Right, and the point that I made in talking about the elections that we've had, that they aren't even talking about the Palestinian issue. This is unconscionable. That political leadership is just completely ignoring the issue in this country. Right? Okay, it's lovely. We have peace with United Arab Emirates. Okay, when did United Arab Emirates ever declare war on the state of Israel? When were they ever fighting this? We have a business agreement with the United Arab Emirates, and it's wonderful, it's great, I'm in support of it. But we need to make peace with our real enemies, right? We need to work toward coexistence. That's what I'm saying, okay? And in the same breath, I'm expressing empathy for the Jewish people who are suffering and have been suffering, and there is no reason that we should be subject to 16 years of missiles raining down on us. I mean, and I fear for the younger generation of American Jews that have lost their sense of Jewish peoplehood in all of this, right? Where is that? Where is this, how is it that they immediately have a reflex for Palestinian suffering, and yet our brothers and sisters who are sitting in Sderot for 16 years with rockets raining down, not 10 days, but 16 years. It's...
Yeah. Stephen?
I think the only thing that I had a disagreement with you on is I think they kind of comment about AIPAC in a sense, because AIPAC is not right-wing. AIPAC supports a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, and I've been involved in AIPAC for a long time. When the Israeli government is left-wing, which it was before, AIPAC supported, nothing changed AIPAC. So it gets mischaracterized as being right-wing because the current government is and has been for a long time. That aside, I'm trying to categorize things into two different pockets. I think you're going there also. There's a reality and there's an aspirational. I think people get confused a lot. So the reality is that there can only be peace when both sides want it. And until that, perhaps the status quo is the best option out there. Again, this is reality. It's not aspirational. I agree with you. We should work. We shouldn't just wait for it to happen. We should take steps. You mentioned some of those to encourage this level to happen. Right now, the reality is, and we know that the Palestinian leadership is committed, especially in Gaza, committed to the destruction of Israel. You could argue whether the people really want it or not, because we really don't know. They seem to have a lot of support, especially in Gaza, but that could change. We don't know. But at least right now, the current leadership, especially in Gaza, probably the PLO also, because they're more concerned about getting money and power. So until that equation changes, and I agree, we shouldn't sit back and wait for it. We should try to encourage it, but we should be clear when we're talking about the reality and what we would like to have, the aspirational side. And then I think we can appeal to the younger people who don't understand that most Israelis don't want to continue this. There are some, but the majority do not want it. And if there was a better option, they would cling to it in a second. We've seen that before in the elections. If they felt that there was a party on the other side that wanted peace, they would force their government to do that.
Thanks, Stephen. Shelley and then Barbara.
So, Stephen, I used to support AIPAC, and my son worked for AIPAC as an intern. And it was during the time of George Bush, and they were very strongly supporting George Bush. He was the incumbent. And they explained, which made complete sense, that the policy of AIPAC is to support the incumbent, that switching gears and having worked so hard with everybody who was in power, that was their policy. And
That's been their policy.
Wait a minute, and we accepted that. That was the policy. When Obama ran for the second time, he was the incumbent. And that's when I withdrew my support, because AIPAC made it clear that they were openly against Obama having a second term. So to say that AIPAC is not right-wing would not be true. I mean, it's very clear that when you have Netanyahu come and speak against Obama during an election year at AIPAC, that is not being it's not just not supporting the incumbent, it's actively seeking for the reins to change. So I have to disagree with you.
So if I could jump into the fray on this. What I want to say is, on the one hand, I do want to give credit where credit is due for AIPAC, which is that since their cardinal mistake of landing squarely on Bibi's side as he tried to torpedo the agreement with Iran, AIPAC learned a very, very important lesson, which is they have been much more even-handed. Pre-corona, when they've brought groups to Israel, they have done a much, much better job of showing the diversity of the political spectrum in Israel. And I give AIPAC a lot of credit for doing that. And I also believe that that was the influence of J Street as well. So I do believe that AIPAC is, making significant steps in the right direction. And I also know well that AIPAC has made, many missteps along the way, and Shelley is highlighting one of those missteps. The great concern is that Israel, in your neck of the woods in the United States, has now become a political issue. That is deeply concerning. The past Israeli ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, did a terrible disservice to Israel in attacking American Jews recently, and saying that Israel should be investing more in its relationship with fundamentalist Christians than with American Jews. Because after all, look at the numbers of fundamentalist Christians who are so pro-Israel, and look at the number of American Jews who are so anti-Israel. That is not the answer. The answer is to turn the American Jewish community, the younger generation, into a more pro-Israel community. and to engage more deeply in sincere education and relationship building. That's what needs to happen. So I know there are those that are working on this, and I hope it happens. I hope it comes to light. One or two more comments, and then I want to switch to the Parsha.
Okay, Barbara had her hand up.
Okay, I had to go on unmute. I'm going, I have to agree with Matt on absolutely everything. Your discussion, the explanation of the left and the right are right on target with me and the way I think. But I always go back to something a little more grassroots. And it's I'm going to paraphrase what Golda Meir said many, many, many years ago, that there can and only will be peace when the Arabs/Palestinians love their children more than they hate the Jews. And so you are talking about years and years and generations of hate. And this is what bothers me. When is there going to be a true come to the table negotiation without the hate and without, because that is so ingrained and deep-seated, and you have to teach hate, you have to teach prejudice, you have to teach all of these things, and it's occurring in this country too. The division and the people who are taking sides. There has to be a middle ground to talk about to even begin a discussion. And it's—
Barbara, and so right back at you. I agree completely with everything that you just said there. And no, we've got to be teaching coexistence in our schools. And we can't only point the finger at what the Palestinian Arabs are doing in their curriculum. We've got to look deeply in our curriculum as well.
I agree.
There was just an incident where a higher up representative of the police, this is in response to what we saw happen in Lod, the chaos that broke out in a number of Israeli cities, which were known for coexistence, like Lod, Akko, Haifa, Tiberia. And this Israeli policeman, higher up administrator, made the comment that we are going to deal with the Jewish terrorists just like we deal with the Arab terrorists. Okay, he was being very, very even-handed and calling it for what it is, that there are Jewish terrorists that are rampaging out there and walking around in gangs and attacking Arabs and attacking Arab property. And he was criticized by the minister, his boss, right? The minister of police. He was criticized by the minister of police that he should never have said that. He should never have said Jewish terrorists, right? Nonsense. There are Jewish terrorists in our midst. And we need to be attentive to them as well. And like you're saying, Barbara, we need to educate toward peace, and people need to come to the table in a genuine, authentic way. I don't know if it's the grassroots where that needs to happen, or if we need to be electing leadership that believes in this vision. So, Carolyn, one more comment, and then
One more comment, and we'll take your other half. Nadia.
I've been living here for a long time, and Matt and I were watching the lynch in Bat Yam the other night, and our hearts were breaking. We couldn't believe that we were watching it as it was happening. I don't believe, I pray to God that this is a very small minority of Jews, and it's a very small minority of Arabs who don't want to live together in peace. I believe that the large silent majority of Arabs would prefer to live with us in Israel than under PA-controlled Palestine. I know personally, and I hope to become one of those people who works to help coexistence. I honestly believe that there is a way, and I pray, and I think everybody here, I hope everybody here can pray with me that we can find some kind of peaceful solution, one way or the other, because this week, as you all know, has been hell, both on the ground and on the internet. That's all.
Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you all. So we will be sure to get these comments out, and I encourage you to, to think more deeply about what I said, and to be in conversation with me. I welcome these conversations. One of the most heartbreaking things that this colleague that wrote to me last night said is that he's afraid to say the things that he wrote to me, to his congregation. And I think that's deeply upsetting and deeply troubling. And we need to think about how it is that we think about, pro-Israel, what it is to be pro-Israel. You can be pro-Israel in many, many different ways. And, please God, we'll see better days ahead for all of us. So let's transition into Parshat Naso, okay? I want to take a look at what I call the curious case of the Nazir. This is my chosen topic because this is the topic that binds together the Torah reading and the Haftarah. Okay, the Haftarah, you might recall, is taken from Judges 13. The story of Shimshon, okay, Samson, okay, one of the most famous of the judges from the book of Judges. But what I want to explain at the outset is that the circumstances of Shimshon as Nazir and what our Parshat Naso describe are very, very different. The Parsha describes what's known as the temporary Nazir, right? That is somebody who takes a vow for a very, very limited period of time to be a Nazir. Shimshon, however, is a lifelong Nazir. Who is the other famous lifelong Nazir that we know from the Hebrew scriptures? There's only one other character besides Samson that we know of. His mother is also barren. In both cases.
Shmuel?
Shmuel. Excellent, Adir. Good. All that investment in Jewish education paid off. There you go, okay? And it all began at Solomon Schechter Day School in Boca Raton. Kol hakavod. Okay, it's Samuel and it's Samson. Okay, those are the two Nizirim of the tradition that we know, but they are lifelong Nazir. Okay, so Naso, as I said, focuses on the temporary state. As we read through the next two passages from Bamidbar, from the book of Numbers, right, I want us, here's your little assignment, okay? I want you to sort of circle, right, or take note, okay, what are the conditions of Nazirut, of being a Nazir? What must a Nazir do? Okay, I'm going to read it aloud, okay, and tell me after we look at the two passages, what jumps out at you. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if anyone, man or woman, explicitly utters a Nazirite vow to set himself apart from the Lord, he will abstain from wine and any other intoxicant. He will not drink vinegar of wine or any other intoxicant. Neither will he drink anything in which grapes have been steeped, nor eat grapes fresh or dried. Throughout his term as Nazirite, he may not eat anything that is obtained from the grapevine, even seeds or skin. Throughout the term of his vow as a Nazirite, no razor will touch his head. It will remain consecrated until the completion of his term as a Nazirite of the Lord. Throughout the term he is set apart for the Lord. He will not go in where there is a dead person, even if his mother and father or his brother or sister should die. He must not defile himself for them, since hair set apart for his God is upon his head. Throughout his term as Nazirite, he is consecrated to the Lord." And then Numbers 6, verses 13 through 15. This is the ritual for the Nazirite. On the day that his term as Nazirite is completed, he will bring to the entrance of the tent of meeting As his offering to the Lord, he will present one male lamb in its first year without blemish. For a burnt offering, one ewe lamb in its first year without blemish. For a sin offering, one ram without blemish for an offering of well-being, a basket of unleavened cakes of choice flour with oil mixed in, and unleavened wafers spread with oil, and the proper meal offerings and libations. So what did we just learn about the Nazir?
Has to be a male.
Nancy,
It
Does
has
it
to
have-
be a male. It's a
what do
male.
what do you mean it has to be a male?
Everything is a he. It's all in the masculine. So this
Okay.
only applies to men. Only men can be Nazarites.
Okay, so let me clarify that. Okay, not true at all. At the very, very beginning, it says, if anyone, man or woman, explicitly utters a Nazarite vow. So apparently, women could also take on the Nazarite vow. Okay, very, very, but there's a caveat with that. They could only take on the vow if it were approved by their father or their husband, right? Because remember, we're talking about patriarchal Israel. Okay, so any vow that a woman took on in biblical society had to be approved by the man in her life.
I think Toby and Adir are ready to jump in. Toby's point may have been made already.
Yeah,
but-
my point was just that that was grammar, and if you read the Declaration of Independence, for example, it also is all in the masculine.
Okay, thank you, thank
I
you.
admit that that's
Yeah, they meant
problematic.
that. They meant that it only applied to men, by the way. That
Yes.
was not an accident.
Yes.
I think Adir put his hand down, so Shelley?
I was just writing, because I don't have to say it, but the whole death thing is very similar to a Kohen. We don't have
Right.
anything today like a Nazareth, like the whole grape thing seems kind of absurd unless it's alcohol. But the death thing is, I know, still to this day is observed by Kohanim.
Excellent. Okay, so part of what's fascinating here, Shelley, is that there's a stricter requirement with regard to wine, grapes, right, intoxication, all of with regard to the Nazir. A Kohen cannot become drunk when he's in the holy precincts, right? We go back to Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron who are punished, and immediately after that, we're told very explicitly that a Kohen cannot be intoxicated when serving in the holy precincts. But it's bound by, right, their sacred responsibilities, right? And it doesn't say that every grape product is off limits. So what's going on here with the Nazir? In one of the academic commentaries that I read on this passage, it says that nomads considered the vine to be a symbol of corruption, of a sedentary life, right? And so nomads, right? And you think even today, Islam, right, frowns upon, drinking wine, the fruit of the vine, as it were. And it's believed that this is a critique of, a life that's settled, because what does the grapevine become a symbol of? It becomes a symbol of peace in the land, right? A person sitting under his grapevine in the land of Israel, that's because, right, in order to cultivate grapes, you have to have peace in the land, right? And it's also a symbol of corruption for the nomads as well. But as you're pointing out, there are 3 caveats to becoming a Nazir, right? No grape product, no razor will touch his head, and he will not go where there is a dead person, right? Just like the prohibition that we see on a priest. Okay, any other comments on the Numbers passages? Okay, if not, I'm going to put a comment in there. And that is the question of, why is the Nazir at the end of his Nazarite tenure required to bring a sin offering? Korban Chatat. What is that about? right? Why does the sacrifice have to be to atone for, right? So it seems to imply that there was a sin involved, and if there was a sin involved, what is the sin that the Nazarite committed? Okay, I just want to plant that seed for now. I don't want you to respond to it yet. I want to take a look at some commentary. So let's jump in and let me share screen. Here we are. And scrolling down to Jacob Milgram, who is our commentator par excellence today. Okay, Jacob Milgram writes the following. Okay, the root nazir means separate oneself. And if the separation is for God, then it implies sanctification. The implication is clear. Only by separating oneself, by abstaining from certain acts permitted to all others, can one become sanctified to God. The noun nazir is probably an abbreviation of Nazir Elohim, which we know from Judges chapter 13, one who is separated or consecrated to God. It is applied metaphorically to one who is singled out from his group. The noun nazir also refers to the hair of the head and figuratively to the consecrated head or headgear and to the unpruned vine. Okay, so three core meanings of the Hebrew nazir: to separate oneself, to be consecrated to God, and it also refers, right, to a consecrated head, the hair on one's head. Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik in Halachic Man says the following: the aspiration to achieve a state of ecstatic transcendentalism, the negation of life and this mortal world, the annihilation of existence and reality, the reaching out of the religious personality to the ethereal world that stretches beyond the confines of tangible existence, is embodied in many of the systems of conduct involving asceticism, vows of abstinence and withdrawal from society. The religious personality sometimes imagines that affliction, suffering, fast, and solitude constitute the media bringing immortal happiness to man. According to his outlook, the man who withdraws from the world and forgoes earthly and ephemeral pleasures is rewarded with eternal life and a sublime spiritual existence, right? In other words, the status of Nazir may be seen as a religious ideal, right? But certainly for an Israelite or a Jew, it seems that that is not the case. Okay, I want to go on 2 more comments and then we can open it up. Jacob Milgram writes, the inclusion of the woman indicates that the Nazarite vow was widely practiced. The woman, however, needed the consent of her father or husband, as with all other vows. At the end of the Second Temple period, many women took the vow, which accounts for the technical term for the female Nazarite, Nizirah, and for the many laws pertaining to her status. A celebrated case of a woman Nazarite was Helena, the convert queen of Abiabene, who took a 7-year vow on the condition that her son returned safely from war, but her Nazarite period lasted twice or thrice as long, according to the Mishnah. And Berenike, or Berenice, the sister of King Agrippa, who also took a vow when she recovered from illness. Milgram goes on to write, the requirement for a purification offering presents an enigma. The Nazarite has successfully completed his vow. Had he contaminated the sanctuary by some major impurity, his Nazariteship would have been aborted. Had he incurred some impurity or wrongdoing unknowingly, he could have brought a purification offering, which requires awareness of the offense. Okay, any comments or questions so far?
Shelley, Toby, Stephen.
So I think that there's something, they're alluding to something that is wrong about separating yourself, wrong about attempting to do, it reminds me of Qumran, the people who separated themselves completely from the rest of the community. It seems like in some way we should be aware, it's a warning, that we are committing a misstep. Like, it's possible to be called upon to do something holy. It's temporary, except in the case of Shimshon. But all I'm saying is that it just seems like it's a path in the wrong direction. And when you come back to the right direction, you then atone somewhat for the direction you went into.
Right, excellent. In Qumran, you're thinking about the Essenes, right, who take this notion of Kadosh Ladonai, of being holy to God, to an extreme. No question about it. And you'll all see later on that Shelley is channeling the wisdom of Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, who is famous to us from the Shulchan Aruch, the Ashkenazic Posek, who comments on Joseph Caro's work. We're going to see what Moshe Isserlis says a little later on, but I want you to remember what Shelley just said.
Toby and then Stephen.
I was just going to say what Shelley did, that I think it was, the sin was becoming a Nazir in the first place.
Right. Very
Thank
good,
you.
Toby.
I'm just thinking it's not necessarily, I'm not quite as rough as Shelley. I tend to agree with her, but I think temporary is okay. I'm thinking like some of these people who take it like a year out of their life to go to yeshiva or learn, but it's not the idea to keep doing that your entire life. And keep thinking like in like Lo Tov Liot Adam Levado, that we're supposed to be involved in the community and help build, and not set ourselves, almost say that like we don't have monasteries, we don't have, that's not our ideal. So we, so, but I think the temporary pullout for, for a short time period is basically acceptable, but then you, you come back in.
Right, excellent, Stephen. I love that you raised the notion of Lo Tov Liot Adam Levado, right, that you shouldn't be alone. I also want to say in the same breath that it was not a requirement of the Nazir to separate him or herself from the community or from the family, right? Notice it doesn't say any of that in what we're given in the Parsha. But still, the metaphor that you're talking about is, right, it is important and noted well here. So thank you. Carolyn? Was there one more?
Do we have another? I don't think so. I think we're ready to move on.
Great. So I want to show you a debate amongst the commentators, essential debate that happens here in our sources. So we scroll down. So I want to go to Maimonides, his Mishneh Torah. Right? This is the first code of Jewish law after the Mishnah. Okay, and notice Maimonides calls it the Mishneh Torah, or second Torah, which shows you that Maimonides had a healthy ego. He thought very highly of his work, and he called it the second Torah. Maimonides writes the following: "Therefore, our sages commanded man to deny himself only the things denied him by Torah. In other words, he should not inflict on himself vows of abstinence on things permitted him." Okay, meaning that there is no need to create more stringencies upon oneself, right? Basically what Shelley was saying before, right? That we don't have to go to any more extremes. Torah gives us enough restrictions. We don't have to place more restrictions on ourselves. And Ibn Ezra continues in this line of thinking and writes that the priests forced the Nazirite to bring the sacrifice, that is, the korban chatat, right, the sin offering, to prevent him from prolonging his Nazirite period beyond his vow. In other words, Ibn Ezra is saying that it needs to be limited in scope. Okay, there you have the opinions of Maimonides and Ibn Ezra. Now I want to show you Nachmanides, who is on the opposite side of this debate. He writes the following: "This man, that is the Nazir, but we should also say it could be a woman, sins against himself when he abandons his vows of abstinence." Okay, Nachmanides, Ramban, is saying that at the end of the time period that he gives or she gives herself, right, he or she abandons the vows that were taken when the days of separation are fulfilled. He had separated himself to be holy to the Lord, and by rights he should always continue to live a life of holiness and separation to God. In accordance with the verse, and I raised up your sons as prophets, and for your young men for Nazarites. There the Nazarite is equated to the prophet. Similarly, the Torah states, all the days of his separation he will be holy to the Lord. Now that he returns to defile himself with worldly passions, he requires atonement, right? A very, very interesting perspective on why the Torah requires that a sin offering be made at the end of this period. Not saying that we agree with Ramban, but he's offering an interesting perspective. And now Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, this could also read Rabbah Shelley Gross. Man must divert his evil inclinations from the extreme to the middle way. This is the basic idea of the Nazarite. He abstains because he observes that he has a weakness for worldly pleasures. He must go to the other extreme in order to attain the middle way. Therefore, the Torah states, he will be holy, since the holiness of the Nazarite will only really be in evidence later on after he has completed the days of his Nazariteship. Only then will he have attained the middle way, not at the time of taking the vow when he had sinned and was imperfect. This is the meaning of the statement, and make atonement for what he sinned. This is because the abstention of the Nazarite is evil in itself, since all extremes are bad. The Nazarite was only commanded to abstain in order to achieve the attainment of the middle way. I love this commentary of Rabbi Moshe Isserlis. Who wants to explain what Isserlis just said? How does he give us new perspective on what it is to be a Nazir or Nizirah?
I
Nancy?
see Shelley smiling. Are you ready to take it on, Shelley?
I don't know. It's very psychological because it's a tendency to go to an extreme. And I've seen it in my own family, and I've seen it in many places where in Judaism and in any religion, it's not just Judaism. I mean, we're talking about priesthood or the nunnery, get thee to the nunnery. I mean, you tend to move in a direction and you just keep moving. And it's not good enough. It's never good enough. You ask a rabbi, how can I be better? Well, let me look at your house. This is something you may not be doing well. So in order to tame yourself and control yourself, you have to put a stop to it. You have to put your own stop on it. And when I'm speaking about you, I'll speak about me. You comes a time in your life when you know who to ask your questions to and who not to ask and what not to ask. So, for example, when I was young and newly married, someone came into my home and was looking at my mezuzot I was hanging. And he made like a comment. I said, what? Oh, no, I don't want to shame you. Well, the minute it was out of his mouth that he didn't think that it was kosher, I was in no position to go out and buy all new, had to go out and buy all new. I think I ended up taking a Hebrew-free loan to get those damn things. And then you ask a rabbi, okay, I can use glass. No, you can't use glass. You have to have a second set of dishes. So you learn to control yourself and not go to such an extreme. And extreme ends up with when you see these people literally hitting themselves to cause pain. Those are extremes. Judaism does not preach extremes. Judaism preaches a life that's livable. That's my comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Nancy, then Stephen.
What I got from this was that becoming a Nazarite was not the goal. The being a Nazarite is the means to the end. It isn't the end. The purpose isn't to become a Nazarite and to set yourself apart and to be holy all the time to that extreme. Being a Nazarite for a finite period of time as the means to the end of, I'm getting to the middle. Okay, I'm going to live a better life, be a better person, and I'm going to do that going forward. And this was a good lesson for me. And I think that that's the takeaway for me from Isserlis's narrative, which is it's the means to the end. It's not the end itself.
So I'll just posit this. Maybe it's individual, maybe it's more on a communal level. But if you don't have both sides to end up in the middle, then you never end up in the middle. So perhaps this experience is one side, you get a more, you might call it extreme, a more observant side, and the less, and then you find your own path, hopefully your path in the middle. But if you never have that side, that experience, if you never know about the, let's say, the orthodox side, you'll end up being too far on the other side. So perhaps it's just an overall balancing thing.
Right, the whole idea, Stephen, is that everyone become a conservative Jew. There you go, or Masorti Jew. Yeah, I just want to respond to two comments that I saw pop up in the chat. One was a question about, a Nazir taking on this vow. If this was something voluntary, was becoming a Nazirite voluntary or mandated because they did something wrong? It seems that Isserlis is giving us the sense that, perhaps it's an individual that did something wrong. Maybe somebody that had some severe addiction and needed to correct their behavior. That's sort of the scenario that Isserlis is painting here. But certainly with the temporary Nazir, it was voluntary. Okay, not so with Samson. And there's another question in the chat about Samson that I want to read. Why was it okay for Samson's mother to commit him to this? Well, it's because Samson's mother was struggling to become pregnant, okay? Just like Samuel's mother. And I am sure you're all familiar with how it is that people take on some crazy vows. They make vows to God, if only God will heal them, if only God will give them a child, whatever the circumstance might be. And you're right, Shelley, she should have made the vow for herself instead of committing her child to this lifelong state. Nonetheless, it seems that this was a tradition in Israel that you would commit your child to, as Stephen said before, living in the monastery, right? Devoting their lives to God. And this was the case with Samson and Samuel. Carolyn.
Being Barbara had up, and then maybe we should move to the conclusion.
Yes.
My question was the one that I texted about the voluntary or mandated.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, good. So I want to go back into the sources and take us toward the finish line. Two great sources that I want to share with you. Okay. Number 13 from Jacob Milgram. Okay, Jacob Milgram writes here, the possibility must be considered that the institution of the temporary Nazirite is of priestly invention. It affected three major changes. The Nazirite period was reduced and entered into on initiative of the votary and not his parents. 2, the abstinences were severely limited, preventing excessive asceticism. And 3, it could be terminated only by a sacrificial regimen and thus brought under priestly control. By the end of the Second Temple period, both priests and rabbis are united in their deprecation of the Nazirite. But the root of their disfavor may be traceable to the holiness laws in Leviticus, which by their silence regarding the Nazirite tells us forcefully enough that this is not the preferred way. Brilliant, what Milgram just said there. The entire book of Leviticus doesn't mention the Nazir once. That's the book that deals with priestly ritual, sacrifices. If anything, the legislation regarding Nazir belongs in the book of Leviticus. So Jacob Milgram is surmising that because Leviticus doesn't talk about this at all, it seems that that's a condemnation of this institution. And what was going on in the book of Numbers is it came to limit the phenomenon of the Nazir by putting very, very specific bounds on it. The final teaching that I want to share with you I know I shouldn't have favorite teachers, but I do. And this was one of my favorite teachers at the Jewish Theological Seminary when I was a rabbinical student, Professor Ed Greenstein, who was my Bible teacher. And he wrote what I consider to be the most brilliant piece of biblical scholarship, an essay entitled The Riddle of Samson. It's from a journal called Proof Text, and I encourage all of you to read the story of Samson and then read Ed Greenstein's essay, The Riddle of Samson. Okay, look at what he writes about Samson. I love this. All the Israelite judges, with the sole exception of Samson, fight on behalf of the people Israel. Samson fights solely for himself. If Samson is taken to represent Israel, the anomaly is understandable. Samson does not fight for Israel because Samson is Israel, right? He says that Samson is a symbol of the Israelite people. He is not a historical figure, but rather read him metaphorically as representing the people of Israel. In the end, a thoughtful reader should be able to perceive this latent meaning of the Samson story. The text transmits here the history of Israel's backsliding, affliction, and ultimate hope by indirection, disguised as it were as the story of Samson the judge. The narrative draws the reader in slowly, shapes his or her responses, and little by little discloses the veiled message. What is that veiled message about? Because if we think deeply about the character of Shimshon, Samson, right, clearly he is representative of the entire people Israel. Just the name Shimshon, right, which many connected to Shemesh, but it seems, as Ed Greenstein argues, that it's connected to Shem, right? Or Ploni Almoni, the anonymous one, right? Name, okay? Meaning that it's a hint that he represents Israel. Also, think about it. Just as Samson runs after non-Israelite women, so to speak, whoring after non-Israelite women, it becomes a symbol of avodah zarah, of idolatry. That's what the Israelites were doing. They were running after idols, just like Samson was running after non-Israelite women. Also, the vow that's imposed, Shelley, you'll love this one. The vow that's imposed on Samson by his mother, right? He didn't have any say in this vow. The same with the Israelites. We didn't have any say in Sinai. Sinai is a vow that is imposed on us from one generation to the next. We don't have any say in it, right? It goes from door to door, one generation to another. And finally, just like Samson, when is it that we find God? We find God when we're in the foxhole, right? There are no atheists in foxholes. So when Samson is about to, right, to be killed, right, by the Philistines, right, he all of a sudden cries out to God, all of a sudden finds God. And the same with the Israelite people in the book of Judges. When do they find God? Right, it's when they're oppressed. It's when they're sitting in the foxholes, right, hiding themselves from their oppressors. That's when they cry out to God. Final comments or questions that you have?
I think Stephen is.
So that things don't change.
You got it, Stephen. Yeah, that's why I think that, you know, it's such a brilliant reading on Ed Greenstein's part, not to read Samson as a historical figure, but rather to read him as an allegory for us, who it is that we are. And then the reading becomes even deeper. It's an absolutely brilliant reading of this story, of this text. Any other questions, comments? Okay, I know you're thinking about a whole lot. So I trust you've got some fodder for the Shabbat table. I want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, truly a Shabbat of peace, a Shabbat of gathering around your tables, and God, Shalom al Yisrael, peace on Israel, and on Medinat Israel, on the state of Israel. And thank you for the birthday wishes that I see popping up in the chat. Very sweet.
Amen. Rabbi, thank you for, starting a very important conversation at the beginning of this class and really ending much the same way. You know, your teaching really has resonance. I want to remind all of you that technically this would be our last class. This is the last scheduled class on the calendar, but we're not ready to say goodbye quite yet. We're going to take a break next week. Rabbi's going to have a little vacation for his birthday, but mark your calendar now for June 3rd. So June 3rd, same time, 9 a.m. for most of us, 8 a.m. for a couple people. We're going to have a siyum, you know, a final teaching for this academic year. This has been a really transformative experience. I also want to bring your attention to the events that are coming up in the coming weeks. The ordination ceremony for our new rabbis and cantors, an event that honors Rabbi Michal Springer, who really transformed the learning and the practice of pastoral education at JTS. Years ago, our rabbis had 40 hours of pastoral care training. It's 400 now. And it's really because of the close work that she did with Chancellor Eisen starting back some 15 years ago. Some really nice book talks happening, a convocation. I also want to let you know that I will be ending my time with JTS the end of June. I have been at the helm of the Florida office for 21 years. I'll have more to say on that at our siyum. But I have really loved meeting and working with all of you, the faculty, and really the brilliant students at JTS, convinced that the work we do is absolutely essential to the future of American Jewish life, to the future of Jewish life. And I think having trained professionals and educators like Rabbi Berkowitz to help guide us through these important conversations that are happening now really bring it home, the work that we do. I have loved knowing all of you. I'll continue to know all of you. We're friends. I'll be part of JTS as a supporter, and I hope as a lay leader, and maybe I'll be a student on the screen. I'll have a chance to comment in a different way for classes in the future. But I want to thank you all so very much for being our partners in what is really holy, holy work. If I haven't talked to you yet about a gift, I'll be calling you in the next couple weeks. And, you know, I hope and pray you'll continue to support us the way you've done in the past. So thank you. And Shabbat Shalom.
Brilliant.
Shabbat Shalom.